Today we're going to talk about rigid transformations. So the word rigid means unchanged. So we are never going to change the size or the shape of whatever shape we start with. And then transformation, that word means it's going to transform a little bit, but as I said earlier, it is never going to become a different shape. It's never going to become smaller or bigger than this shape here. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the 3 different kinds, and then I'm going to show you what questions to ask when you know which kind of transformation you're working with. Okay, so the first transformation is called reflection. So if we have a shape and it's on a coordinate grid and we reflect it, that is kind of like a flip. So we would just take this, we'd flip it, and it would become down here. So a lot of times when we do reflections, we need to know what are we reflecting it over? A lot of times we reflect over the x-axis or the y-axis, but there's an infinite amount of lines on a coordinate grid. Here's a line, 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 here's a line. We even can make diagonal lines. So whenever you're doing a reflection or a flip, the question you need to ask is, what am I reflecting it over? So another example of a reflection would be a shape maybe starting right here, and then if I reflect it over the y-axis, it's like I bend in half. It would become like this. If I have this shape here and I reflect it over the x-axis, it would flip like this. So that's all a reflection is. Think of a reflection like a flip, okay? The second one is called a translation. When you do a translation is just a movement. It doesn't turn it any which way like a reflection. So a translation would be like if we have this shape right here and I move it to the right, now it's right there, that's a translation. It just moved. So whenever you do a translation, there are 2 questions you need to ask yourself. You need to ask yourself, which direction and how much? So an example of doing a translation would be 4 units down. We would move this 1, 2, 3, 4 units down. So a translation is just a movement, but everything stays facing the same direction. Okay. The very last one that we're going to talk about is a rotation. So just like that word, I bet you thought of the word rotate. A rotation is going to kind of change the direction of something. When you do a rotation, you need to ask 3 questions. You need to ask which direction, how many degrees, and where's the center? So let me show you what I mean. So let's pretend this is our shape. A rotation of which way, that would either be clockwise or counterclockwise. The degree amount would be how much is your shape turning. So if it's just a teeny tiny bit of degrees, it would just turn like that. Like maybe that's about 15 degrees. If we turned this a whole 90 degrees, it would look like this. Okay, so you have to know the degrees. The last thing that you need to know is where is the center? What is it rotating around? So the examples that I just did with you, this would be my center. So I'm going to show you what 90 degrees clockwise looks like with this as a center, with this as a center, and with this as a center. So 90 degrees clockwise with this as a center would look like this. Now I'm going to bring it back to its original form. 90 degrees clockwise with this as the center, I would hold my finger there and I'd go like this. Okay, and I'll bring it back to its original form. 90 degrees with this as the center, would move it that way. So every time I'm moving it 90 degrees clockwise, but I'm moving it from different points. When I teach this in class, I like kids to use their hands. So If I were doing a 90-degree rotation clockwise and my pinky was my center, I would move it like this. If my middle finger was my center, I'd move it around that. And if my thumb was my center, I'd move it around that. So it all depends what your center is. So let's review one more time. When you do a reflection, you only need to ask one question. What line am I reflecting my shape over? When you're doing a translation, you need to ask two questions. What direction and how many units? And then the last one, rotation, you need to ask yourself three questions. Which direction, how many degrees, and where is my center? So this is just the first video I want to make about transformations. I'll make another one that gets a little more intricate, but this was just an introduction to rigid transformations. If this made sense to you, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up.